I had not seen my family in almost a year. Not really. Sure, there were birthday messages in the family group chat and the occasional forwarded meme from my cousin Derek, but nothing beyond the superficial. So when I said yes to the Sunday lunch invitation, I already knew I was setting myself up. I chose my outfit carefully, a plain navy blue blouse, jeans with no tears or intentional distress, and my most neutral flats. I didn't want to seem like I was trying too hard, but I also didn't want to give them anything more to mock. Still, no outfit could shield me from the weight I knew I was about to carry again. The Green family lunches were always extravagant affairs, not because of the food, which was usually mediocre, but because of the performance. Every Sunday, it was a showcase of who had climbed the highest, who had traveled the farthest, who had the boldest stock portfolio. I often wondered if they even tasted the food with all that pride in their mouths. I arrived 5 minutes early and still felt late. The moment I stepped into my Aunt Donna's house, the air shifted. It always did. The scent of rosemary chicken and lemon polish filled the space, but what truly suffocated me was the judgment that seemed to cling to every piece of decor. They hugged me, Aunt Donna, Uncle Ray, my cousins Derek and Melissa, all polite smiles and rehearsed welcomes. No one asked why I had been away so long. Maybe they already assumed it was shame. Or worse, indifference. I found my seat at the long table, tucked between Derek's newest fiancée and the window overlooking the backyard where my uncle's third boat was parked. Not even on water, just there, a monument to his disposable income. Conversation buzzed quickly around the table, market trends, luxury rentals, someone's recent trip to Santorini. I nodded, smiled where appropriate, sipped my water with care. No one asked me how work was going. No one asked about my life. That was the thing with the Greens. Silence wasn't space, it was dismissal. I was invisible not because they forgot me, but because they chose to. Somewhere between the serving of the second bottle of wine and the dessert trays being passed, my Aunt Donna turned her gaze on me. "Samantha," she said, and her voice was all syrup, too sweet to be genuine, "you've been quiet. Still working at that small office of yours?" She said small like it was a disease. I forced a smile. Yes. Still there. She tilted her head, like I had confessed to something tragic. "Well, at least you're consistent," she added. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I looked around the table and realized everyone was watching me now, but not in a way that felt curious. It felt performative. They were waiting for a line, a punch, a quote for the family archives. I gave them nothing. My cousin Melissa was already checking her phone. Derek leaned toward his plate, bored. It was clear, I had once again failed to impress. And maybe that was the worst of it. Not the comments, not even the dismissal, but the deep, familiar ache of not being enough for them. That quiet gnawed at me more than their words ever could. Because they didn't see me. Not really. They saw a caricature they had drawn years ago, the cousin who stayed small, who lived in an apartment with no balcony, who never chased status. I was not part of the family tree's glossy branches. I was the root they pretended not to notice. That afternoon, as I stirred my coffee and listened to my uncle boast about interest rates, I felt it again, that sharp, cold blade of comparison they carried so freely. And yet, something inside me refused to bleed this time. Something inside me whispered, "Let them think they know who you are." They had no idea. The meal stretched longer than it should have. I counted the seconds between each bite, each shallow question, each polished toast about promotions and dividends. At some point, my eyes drifted to the edge of my plate where the sauce had begun to congeal, the way conversations do when no one speaks honestly. That's when Aunt Donna leaned forward, resting her perfectly manicured hands on the table like a queen preparing to deliver a decree. "Samantha," she said, drawing out my name like it tasted unfamiliar in her mouth, "I hope you don't mind me asking." She paused. Of course she didn't hope. She was setting the trap, smoothing the edges of her tone to make it look like concern, not judgment. I nodded, more curious than afraid. "Sure, what's up?" She smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a smile that suggested affection or care. No, this was the kind of smile you wear when you know you're about to land a hit but want to pretend it's a hug. "You're still living in that modest apartment, right?" Her voice dipped just enough on the word modest to poison it. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, wondering if she realized how often she wrapped her cruelty in lace. Yes, I said simply. And still working at that administrative job? Same salary? Now eyes were turning again. I could feel the weight of the table shift toward me. A dozen ears pretending to chew but actually listening. Yes, still working there. And the salary's fine, thank you. She offered a theatrical nod, the kind people give when they're pretending to validate something they don't respect. That's good. Really. But I just wonder, have you ever thought about, I don't know, she waved her hand like she was stirring invisible ambition in the air, taking a bigger step? Maybe going after something with more potential? I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because it was all so predictable. I had seen this scene before, lived through it more times than I could count. But today, it didn't sting like it used to. Not quite. I appreciate the concern, I said, keeping my voice calm, almost gentle. But I'm doing what makes sense for me. That wasn't the right answer, apparently. Donna's lips tightened slightly. My cousin Melissa bit into a cherry tart like it was the only safe space left. And Derek, dear, always loud Derek, let out a short breath that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Then the murmurs came. Little chuckles passed between plates and glances. I caught Uncle Ray giving a side smirk. Even the younger cousins, who had once clung to my stories at family barbecues, looked unsure now, as if they were being trained to mock me too. The worst part? It wasn't even what they said. It was how they said it, the faux kindness, the sugar-dipped pity that masked something far sharper. They didn't care about my happiness. They cared that I didn't mirror theirs. In their eyes, success had a dress code and a dollar sign. I had neither. So I was the odd one, the disappointment, the cautionary tale they told themselves to feel superior. But I stayed quiet. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list the hours I worked, the things I sacrificed, or the reasons behind my choices. Let them assume. Let them laugh behind napkins and sips of imported wine. Because while they played at being royalty in borrowed castles, I was building something they couldn't see. Not yet. It was Derek, of course. If there was ever a torchbearer for family arrogance, it was him. He waited just long enough for the room to settle after Aunt Donna's little performance. Then, with a smirk that only someone who believed life owed him everything could wear, he leaned back in his chair, glass of wine dangling between two fingers. You know, he said casually, his voice slicing through the small talk like a scalpel, I've always admired how you manage to stay so grounded, Sam. I didn't take the bait. Not yet. You mean broke? Melissa chimed in, laughing under her breath. A few others chuckled, not loudly, but just enough to signal where the tide was turning. Derek continued, unfazed. No, seriously. It's impressive. Everyone else here's always reaching, climbing. Melissa's launching her second startup. I just got my Tesla, you saw it outside, right? I had. He had parked it deliberately in front of the entrance, headlights gleaming like a lighthouse of ego. But you, Derek said, swirling his wine as if it gave his words weight, you've always been the, let's say, consistent one. I tilted my head. That's one word for it. Then he did it. He went too far. No shame in being the weakest link, Sam. Not everyone's built for ambition. Someone's gotta hold the bottom steady, right? The table froze. For one delicious second, everyone remembered what discomfort felt like. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at anyone. I stared down at my plate, now a graveyard of untouched dessert, and let the words land. They didn't hurt the way they used to. Not anymore. They revealed. In that silence, a strange thing happened. I felt something shift. Not in the room, in me. A quiet, almost sacred clarity surfaced. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. Cleaner. The realization that I owed them nothing. Not explanations. Not performances. Not even my presence. I raised my head slowly, letting my gaze pass from face to face. Aunt Donna, suddenly very interested in folding a napkin. Uncle Ray, sipping from an empty glass. Melissa, scrolling through her phone like the conversation had never happened. And Derek, still smiling, still proud of the verbal blow he had just delivered. I should have stormed out. That's what the old me would have done. Maybe cry later. Maybe call a friend and ask, was I overreacting? But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Because for the first time, I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't trying to shrink myself into a space that had never truly welcomed me. I just watched them, my family, and saw them for what they were, people who measured worth by noise, not substance. And I? I had been silent for years. But I had never been empty. There are moments that don't announce themselves. No rising music, no warning flash. They just arrive. Quietly. And if you are not ready, you miss your own turning point. But I was ready. Derek's words were still hanging in the air, bitter and smug, when I placed my napkin down. The fork hit the plate with a soft clink, but in that silence, it might as well have been a gunshot. I stood up slowly. No rush, no drama. Just enough time for them to start wondering what I was about to do. It wasn't anger that guided me. It was something colder. Finer. A decision made long ago, but only now finding its voice. You know, I began, it's always been fascinating to me how you all measure success. Aunt Donna stiffened. Melissa blinked without looking up from her phone. Derek smirked, like a lion bored with prey. It's never about meaning or value with you, I continued. It's about noise. About who gets to shine louder, brag harder. I looked around the table, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them squirm. And then I dropped it. Do you know who owns the Harbor Heights complex? The name landed like a foreign object. Familiar enough to recognize, but strange enough to cause discomfort. I saw Derek frown. Melissa slowly lifted her eyes. Even Uncle Ray leaned forward a little. I do. I let it sit there. No embellishment. No grin. Just fact. I bought it 5 years ago. When the area was still considered a bad bet. I renovated it. Managed it myself. And now? It's worth more than triple what I paid. Fully paid off. Brings in more income than my salary ever did. My voice was calm. Matter of fact. But it cut through the room like a blade. Derek scoffed. That's not, how? I didn't answer him. I looked at my father instead. You asked if I was joking. I paused. I'm not. The expression on his face was unreadable. Maybe part pride, part disbelief. But he said nothing. None of them did. That was the thing about truth. It didn't need permission to land. It just needed silence. I never needed to prove anything to this family, I said, softer now. But you kept pushing me into the corner, into the role of the one who didn't dream big enough. What you didn't realize is that I wasn't playing the same game. I reached for my bag. No rush. No flair. Just motion. I live in a modest apartment because I like it. I drive an old car because it still runs. I didn't ask for approval because I stopped needing it a long time ago. Aunt Donna's lips parted, but no words came out. Melissa glanced around, maybe waiting for someone to say it wasn't true. But no one did. You all talk about ambition, I added at the door, but sometimes real ambition is quiet. It builds while you're busy showing off. And then I left. No slamming doors. No parting shots. Just the echo of their silence behind me, and the clarity that, for once, they were listening. I didn't slam the door when I left Aunt Donna's house. I didn't walk fast. I didn't need to. The silence I left behind did more damage than any outburst ever could. I had dropped truth like a stone in still water, and the ripples were only beginning. What surprised me was how good it felt, not triumphant, not angry, just right. Honest. The ride home was quiet. No music. Just the sound of the engine and my thoughts, playing over everything in slow motion. Derek's face when I said I owned the building. Aunt Donna's disbelief. My father's nervous laugh. All of it lived in my memory like echoes in an empty church. I pulled into my parking spot, the same one I had used for years, in front of the same apartment they all pitted. And yet, for the first time, I looked at it with something close to pride. Not because it was grand. Not because it proved anything. But because it had been mine, always, and I had never needed it to be more than it was. Inside, I put my bag down and stood still in the dark. No messages. No missed calls. Just silence. The same silence they had always given me, but this time, it meant something different. This wasn't dismissal. This was shock. This was the weight of truth landing where they had never expected it to fall. I made myself tea and sat by the window, watching the night settle in. I imagined them still at the table, dessert plates half finished, words caught in their throats. Maybe they were trying to rewrite the conversation already. Maybe they were pretending I hadn't meant it. Or worse, maybe they were realizing they had never really known me at all. And that hurt, more than I wanted to admit. Not their surprise. Not their silence. But the years I had let their small vision of me shape how I moved through the world. The years I had swallowed their jabs and turned down my own light just to avoid confrontation. All the times I chose invisibility because it was easier than fighting their expectations. My phone buzzed once. It was my father. Just 4 words, "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long time before putting it face down on the table. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Let him sit in it for a while. Let all of them. They had built a story around me, the struggling one, the dreamless one, and I had quietly lived outside it for years. Now that the truth was out, they didn't know how to react. So they stayed silent. And I let them. Because sometimes, silence isn't peace. Sometimes, it's the sound of everything falling apart. I did not wake up the next morning feeling victorious. There was no dramatic music playing, no cinematic glow around me. It was just me, my pillow, and the quiet hum of the city outside my window. But I felt something different, not lighter, exactly, but clearer. The fog that had always hung over me after those family events was gone. In its place, a kind of stillness I hadn't known in years. They didn't know the story. Not the real one. They never asked, and I never offered. Why would I? Their curiosity had always been selective, reserved for things they could measure, compare, and critique. But the path I took? It wasn't made for their kind of conversation. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't sparkle. It was slow. Quiet. Intentional. It started nearly a decade ago. I was 29, tired of scraping by, and watching my savings evaporate faster than my ambition. Back then, the economy wasn't exactly kind, and Tampa's old industrial neighborhoods were filled with more warnings than promises. But I started noticing something. Small things, new coffee shops popping up, young couples walking dogs in areas that used to be deserted after sunset, art murals where boarded-up windows once were. One Saturday morning, I saw a listing online. A rundown 3-building complex on the edge of Ybor City. The photos were awful, cracked sidewalks, broken mailboxes, fading paint. But the price made me pause. It was the kind of number that seemed like a mistake. I printed it out, circled it, and took a drive. The buildings were worse in person. The smell of mildew clung to the air, and a raccoon scurried under one of the porches as I walked past. Still, something in me refused to flinch. I saw the cracks, yes, but I also saw the potential. The bones were solid. The layout made sense. And the street, despite its wear, had life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. I spent the next 2 weeks doing research. I talked to the city planning department. I studied zoning laws. I sat in on neighborhood association meetings just to understand what people were hoping for. And I realized something no one in my family had ever taught me: opportunity doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers. Sometimes, it looks like rot before it looks like gold. I made an offer. Lowball, but cash. I had saved for years, skipped vacations, drove the same old car, worked weekends at side jobs. And when the owner accepted, I signed the papers without telling a soul. Not because I was hiding, but because I knew what they'd say. Why that neighborhood? It's a money pit. You're not qualified for this. Stick to what you know. So I said nothing. I put on my work clothes, called a contractor I trusted, and began the slow, careful process of turning those buildings into something livable. I spent evenings after my day job walking through dusty hallways, checking water pressure, comparing flooring samples. My weekends were filled with decisions about insulation and roofing and whether to go with beige or gray tile. It was exhausting. And I loved it. The first tenants moved in 10 months later. Young professionals, artists, couples with small kids. They paid on time. They cared about the space. They brought life to something everyone else had written off. Slowly, I raised the rent, nothing outrageous, just fair. And when the city announced plans for a new community center 2 blocks away, property values jumped. And they kept jumping. 5 years later, the buildings were worth nearly 3 times what I paid. I refinanced. Created a legal entity, S. Green Properties LLC, and bought another small property nearby. Not out of greed. Out of momentum. Out of belief. I wasn't building an empire. I was building something solid, something mine. All while my family saw the same old Sam, same job, same car, same apartment. They mistook my restraint for failure. But I wasn't living small. I was playing the long game. And now? Now the game had changed. There's a strange kind of intimacy in working while the world sleeps. When I think back to those years, the first 5 especially, what I remember most vividly isn't exhaustion. It's solitude. There's something almost sacred about rising before the sun, tying your hair back, and heading to a job no one understands because no one sees it. And I never expected them to. My days started at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'd clock in at the administrative office, the same job they all scoffed at, balancing budgets, approving vendor contracts, and organizing schedules for people who didn't know my last name. By 5 in the afternoon, I'd change my shoes, grab a notebook from my car, and drive to whichever site needed my attention. Sometimes it was a tenant complaint about a leaky pipe. Other times, it was an emergency with the HVAC unit or a contractor who failed to show up. There were days I came home with drywall dust in my hair and bruises on my shins from climbing stairs with supply boxes. I didn't have evenings. I didn't have weekends. I had spreadsheets, plumbing invoices, zoning applications, and paint samples. My dinner was often takeout, eaten in the front seat of my car, parked just outside one of my properties while I waited for a locksmith or walked a new tenant through their lease. And yet, I never once complained. Not to anyone. Because I knew what I was building. The hard part wasn't the physical toll. It was the silence. The invisibility. The knowledge that the same family who laughed at my old Toyota, who asked me at every gathering when I'd get a real promotion, never once wondered what I was actually doing with my time. To them, I was static. Predictable. Harmless. But behind every assumption, I was layering bricks. Not just of property and equity, but of confidence, strategy, resilience. They thought my life was small because I didn't parade it. Because I didn't post about it. Because I wasn't loud. They didn't see the night classes I took to understand commercial real estate law. Or the mornings I spent reading market forecasts instead of sleeping in. They didn't see me arguing with a city inspector over a misfiled permit. They never saw me spend hours translating legal documents into language I could actually understand. I taught myself how to analyze property tax changes, how to file business returns, how to navigate tenant disputes without losing my patience or my values. I wore the same coat for 6 winters. I brought lunch from home every day. I skipped weddings I couldn't afford to travel to. I lived without luxury not because I couldn't afford it, but because I knew it would cost me something greater: time, flexibility, control. I invested in silence, in quiet movement, in decisions that bore fruit only after years of drought. That's what they'll never understand. That building something real, something lasting, doesn't look like success. It looks like sacrifice. They saw an old apartment. They didn't see that I chose to stay there so I could put every spare cent into my buildings. They mocked my 10-year-old car, not knowing it was paid off in full and had never failed me. They made jokes about my safe job, unaware that it gave me just enough security to take calculated risks after hours. And when I didn't show up for months at family dinners, they chalked it up to shame or bitterness. Never once did they imagine I was choosing to work instead. To grow. To plan. I remember one Christmas when Derek gave me a self-help book as a gift. "Thought this might help you figure out what you want," he said, laughing. I thanked him. Then went home, logged into my tenant portal, and sent out 6 renewal notices for leases about to expire. That same week, I secured a loan for the next renovation. They thought I was stuck. But I was building something they could never tear down, not with words, not with laughter, not even with disbelief. And now, they would have to live inside it. The next morning, I was already at my desk at 8 o'clock sharp, as always. The office was quiet, the usual hum of the printer and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights above me. I buried myself in tasks, budget reviews, vendor confirmations, a calendar full of meetings no one would ever associate with ambition. Just another Tuesday. Or so I thought. At 10:32, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I let it ring. A few seconds later, a message appeared: "We need to talk." Derek. I stared at the screen for a moment, then flipped the phone face down. I wasn't ready to hear what he had to say, especially not after years of him acting like my existence was some extended punchline. And yet, I knew. I knew curiosity had taken hold of him. That what I had said at that table wasn't just shocking, it was a threat to the foundation of his superiority. An hour later, another ping. This time, a screenshot from the Hillsborough County Property Appraiser website. A red circle around S. Green Properties LLC. The property address, Harbor Heights Residential Complex. And below it, just 3 words: "Is this real?" I didn't reply. What could I say that I hadn't already said in person, in fewer words and with more weight? But I won't pretend I didn't feel something as I stared at that screen. A strange mix of triumph and sadness. Triumph because I knew the truth had reached them now, undeniable and documented. Sadness because it had taken public records and digital proof for them to believe something I had simply spoken. Later that afternoon, my work email pinged, a forwarded message from Melissa. I opened it hesitantly. It was a scan of a message she had received from her property manager: "Dear resident, please be advised that your lease is held under the ownership of S. Green Properties LLC. For questions regarding your renewal, contact your landlord directly." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the absurdity of it. After all these years of being talked over, looked down upon, I had ended up not just on their level, but quite literally above them, at least on paper. I was the one reviewing their lease terms, approving improvements to their units, managing the spaces they called home. By 5 o'clock, my voicemail was full. Not just Derek and Melissa, but even Aunt Donna had called. Her voice, so sharp days earlier, now sounded light, unsure, almost, if I dared to believe it, apologetic. "Samantha, dear, I just wanted to say, well, I heard some things, and I think we should talk. I'm sorry if anything I said came out wrong." Came out wrong? That's what they always said when they weren't sorry for the meaning, just the reaction it provoked. But I didn't call back. Not then. Because I was finally in a place where their confusion no longer felt like my burden to ease. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them sit with the realization that I had built something real while they built stories around who they thought I was. And for once, the facts stood taller than their opinions. That night, I took a walk through one of my properties. The garden lights flickered on as I passed. I greeted tenants, nodded at a child riding her bike, smiled at a couple unloading groceries. This was real. This was mine. And it had been, even when they refused to see it. Now they saw. And no one would ever be able to unsee it. By Wednesday, the tone of the messages had shifted completely. What began as confusion quickly turned into curiosity, and then, perhaps most surprisingly, into admiration. At least, that's what they called it. It started with Derek. He sent a voice note, something he had never done before, as if hearing his own voice might soften the awkwardness between us. "Hey, Sam, look, I guess I owe you an apology. I didn't know, obviously. And, wow. That's actually impressive. Seriously. Maybe we could catch up sometime? I'd love to hear how you did all that." I played the message once, then deleted it. It wasn't anger that made me erase it. It was the fatigue. The kind that comes from realizing how quickly people's respect is tied to what they can see, not what they can understand. Later that day, Melissa messaged me on Instagram, a platform we'd never used to talk before. A photo of a coffee shop near her building, followed by, "This place has amazing chai lattes. Want to meet up? Just talk?" Aunt Donna's attempt came wrapped in etiquette, of course. A formal email, subject line, a clarification and an invitation. She wrote about how she had reflected deeply on our last conversation and would welcome the chance to reconnect and understand more about my journey. It read like a speech written by someone else. The kind of email sent not from guilt, but from discomfort. From the sudden awareness that perhaps she had underestimated me, and that doing so might now come at a social cost. I read it 3 times before closing the tab. I didn't reply. And then came my father. He didn't write. He didn't call again. Instead, on Friday evening, as I was returning from a meeting with one of my property managers, I found him sitting on the steps outside my apartment building. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe he always looked that way, and I just hadn't taken the time to see it clearly. He stood up as I approached, offering a hesitant smile. "I figured you'd ignore me if I called again," he said. I didn't smile back. I unlocked the door without a word and walked in. He followed. Not boldly. Carefully. Like a man trying to walk across ice without making it crack. "I'm not here to fix everything," he said once we were inside. "Just to say that I didn't know. And that's on me." I sat down on the edge of the couch. He remained standing. "All these years," he continued, "I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. I thought you weren't pushing because you didn't want more. Turns out you were just pushing in a different direction." I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch. Finally, he sighed. "I'm proud of you, Sam. I should have said that a long time ago. I see it now. I really do. It would have meant more if I hadn't had to force them to see it. If their pride hadn't arrived only after discovery, only after proof. But I knew he meant it. I could hear it in his voice, raw, strained, real. Still, I didn't feel the need to comfort him. "I didn't do it for that," I said simply. "I know," he replied, nodding. He stayed a few minutes longer. Asked about the buildings. About how I started. I gave him the surface version. Enough to fill the space without offering too much of myself. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated. "If you ever feel like coming to dinner, I'd love to see you there. No expectations this time. Just you." After he left, I sat in the quiet for a long time. Messages kept coming that weekend. Cousins. Family friends. Even Melissa's boyfriend, who apparently had just realized I was his landlord. I didn't answer any of them. Because something had shifted inside me, something I wasn't ready to give back. I had lived for so long under the shadow of their judgment, believing I had to earn their approval to matter. But now I knew the truth. I didn't need their validation. I never did. The invitation came like it always did, printed, elegant, unmistakably green. My grandfather's 80th birthday celebration. Formal dress code. Backyard catered dinner. Everyone expected. A family moment not to be missed, the card read. I placed it on the kitchen counter and left it there for 3 days, unread but impossible to ignore. He was the only one in that family who had never tried to shrink me. My grandfather had a quiet presence, one that didn't command, but invited. As a child, I used to sit by him while he read the newspaper, neither of us speaking, and still it felt like conversation. Maybe that was the reason I eventually said yes. But this time, I wouldn't enter like before. I wore a simple black dress, elegant but modest. No designer labels, no loud accessories. Just me, as I had always been, except now, I didn't need to lower my eyes or adjust my posture to fit their expectations. When I stepped into Aunt Donna's garden, all conversations paused, as if someone had accidentally hit mute on the gathering. I could feel every glance, not cold, not mocking this time, but curious. Unsure. The balance had shifted, and they were still trying to figure out how to navigate it. My grandfather, seated under a white tent surrounded by a semicircle of flowers, smiled when he saw me. A genuine smile, soft, grateful, unchanged. I walked straight to him, hugged him gently, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. No tension. No whispers. Just that moment. It didn't last long. During the second toast, right after the champagne glasses clinked and the music started again, Derek approached. He looked restrained. He held a drink he wasn't drinking and wore the forced ease of someone rehearsing every word. "Sam," he said, "glad you came." I nodded. Grandpa deserved it. There was an awkward pause. Then, with a nervous chuckle, he added, "So, you're really not going to tell us how you did it?" I tilted my head slightly. "Did what?" "You know." He gestured vaguely, as if property acquisition was a magic trick. "Built all that. The buildings. The business. The empire." I smiled. Not to please, not to soften. Just to show I wasn't hiding. "While you were all looking up," I said calmly, "I was looking around. And I saw value where no one else did." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," I continued, "you were chasing things that looked good on paper. I was building something that would last. Quietly. Carefully. While you were comparing watch brands, I was comparing renovation bids." Derek didn't have a response. He took a sip, nodded slowly, and muttered, "Damn." Later, Aunt Donna tried. She approached me like I was a guest of honor she hadn't expected to admire. "I suppose we all underestimated you," she said with a strained laugh. I looked at her, unflinching. "No. You decided what I was worth a long time ago. You just never asked if you were right." She said nothing. Just stood there, smile faltering. And then my father came. We exchanged a glance across the yard. He didn't approach, just raised his glass in a quiet salute. I nodded once. That was enough. The night wore on. Laughter returned to the party. Conversations shifted. But nothing went back to how it was. They had seen a new version of me, or perhaps, the version that had always been there, hidden behind their assumptions. I didn't stay long after dessert. Before leaving, I returned to my grandfather's side. He reached for my hand and squeezed it. "They finally see it now," he said softly. "See what?" "That you were never behind," he replied. "Just walking a different path." I kissed his cheek, said goodbye, and walked out with my head high. That night, for the first time after a family event, I didn't replay every word or question my presence. Because this time, I hadn't been tolerated. I had been seen. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a reckoning, not immediate, but delayed. It settles days later when the dust has cleared and the performances have ended. That week, I felt it in waves. Phone calls that didn't come. Invitations suddenly cautious in tone. Messages stripped of the usual superiority, now replaced by something else. Something heavier. Guilt. It clung to them. Not openly, no one from the Green family would ever admit to wrongdoing outright, but in the pauses between their words, in the way their sentences now started with "I didn't mean to offend" or "I guess I never realized," their voices trembled where once they mocked. The certainty was gone. Even in the office, where a few distant cousins worked at satellite locations, the shift echoed. Emails arrived with warmer greetings. One forwarded me a podcast on real estate growth trends with a note, "Thought you might find this interesting." Another asked if I'd be willing to give her some advice on local property taxes. These weren't insults masked as jokes anymore. They were peace offerings, awkward and late. But I didn't reply. Because I had nothing to say to their guilt. It wasn't my job to soothe it. They weren't sorry for what they did, only for what they had to confront now, the possibility that everything they'd assumed about me was wrong. And not just wrong, but unjust. For decades, I had watched them weigh worth by title, by brand, by the volume of applause. But I had never seen them weigh judgment. Never seen them sit inside the discomfort of their own blindness. Until now. One evening, I stopped by Harbor Heights. It had become a ritual of mine, walk the perimeter, check the lighting, greet tenants, talk to the groundskeeper about the plants. It grounded me in something real. That night, I found Melissa's boyfriend, Evan, waiting outside Building C with a clipboard and a nervous smile. "Hey," he said. I didn't realize when I signed the lease that you were, well, the landlord?" I finished. He nodded, clearly unsure whether to laugh or shrink. "Yeah. I mean, Melissa told me. Eventually. I just didn't put the name together before." I smiled faintly. "That happens." He hesitated, then added, "This place is really well run. Everyone says that. Like, it's not flashy, but everything works. Feels like someone actually cares." I thanked him. Not because I needed the compliment, but because I could tell he meant it. Then I kept walking, not offering more. Let them sit with the weight of the irony. That week, I donated 2 sets of new outdoor benches to a community park near one of my older properties. No announcement. No press release. Just quiet action, the kind I had always believed in. Later, Aunt Donna emailed again. The subject line was just one word, forgiveness? I didn't open it. I already knew what it would say. I wasn't angry anymore. I hadn't been for a while. But that didn't mean I owed them anything. Not forgiveness. Not presents. Not explanations. Forgiveness, I was learning, isn't always about returning to what was. Sometimes, it's just choosing not to carry what they dropped on you. Letting them hold the weight of their own conscience, for once. And finally, letting go of mine. It took me weeks to decide, and even then, the final choice didn't come with a dramatic moment or an emotional breakdown. It came quietly, like most important things in my life tend to. I was reviewing the quarterly reports from my properties when I paused, my eyes resting on one number in particular, the projected return from the oldest building I owned, the one I had renovated first. That building had served its purpose. It was solid, reliable, and profitable. But it didn't hold sentimental value anymore. It had done what I needed it to do, launch me, stabilize me, prove something. Now, it was just a number in a column, a part of a portfolio. So I sold it. The offer came from a local developer who respected the integrity of the structure. No intention to tear it down. Just to modernize a few things and maintain what I had built. That mattered to me. I wasn't just selling property. I was letting go of a chapter, one that had taught me how to be invisible, strong, resourceful. The sale went through smoothly. Clean, direct. The wire transfer hit my account on a Friday. By Monday, I had already decided where part of that money would go. There's a shelter downtown, nothing fancy, a transitional space for women and children fleeing difficult circumstances. I'd driven past it 100 times but never stopped. This time, I walked in. I didn't introduce myself as a donor. I just listened. To the director, to the staff, to one of the women who'd been living there for months with her daughter. I asked what they needed most, and I expected answers like blankets, or beds, or even food. But what they said was time. Most of these women, the director explained, don't need more pity. They need space, time to regroup, to breathe, to figure out what's next. So that's what I gave them. I funded the renovation of 2 additional rooms in the shelter, new flooring, proper insulation, better lighting. I paid for a year of child care vouchers so women could attend job interviews without fear. I didn't announce any of it. No plaques. No photo ops. Because not everything built needs to be seen. Around the same time, Melissa reached out again. This time, she asked if I could meet her for coffee. Not to talk about real estate. Not to apologize. Just to talk. I said yes. Not because I owed her anything, but because I no longer felt like I had to guard myself from her words. Whatever she said, it wouldn't touch me the way it once did. The conversation was simple. She talked about her startup, her stress, how exhausting it had been to constantly chase recognition. At one point, she paused and looked at me differently. I envy your calm, she said. Like, truly. You're not trying to prove anything. I shrugged. Maybe I used to be. But I learned that proving something doesn't mean you have to perform it. She nodded, slowly. And that was it. We parted on good terms, no promises of becoming best friends, but with mutual respect that had never existed before. That evening, back in my apartment, I looked around, same furniture, same soft lighting, same quiet. And I realized I wasn't interested in upgrading it. I didn't want a high-rise condo or a smarter kitchen or imported countertops. This space had held me through every version of myself. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. And I chose to keep it. Not out of nostalgia. Out of intention. What stayed now, stayed by choice, not by habit, not by fear, not by compromise. I wasn't seeking their approval anymore. I wasn't chasing recognition. I had something far better, direction. Purpose. Peace. And I knew, finally, that what I had built wasn't just real estate. It was freedom. They still talk about that lunch. Not in front of me, of course. But I know it comes up, whispered over holiday wine, passed like legend through phone calls and family brunches. The day quiet Samantha stood up, told a roomful of Greens exactly who she was, and walked out before anyone could stop her. They don't say it with bitterness anymore. They say it with something closer to awe. Or confusion. As if they still can't quite reconcile the version of me they thought they knew with the one that finally emerged. But I'm no longer concerned with how they tell that story. Because I'm writing my own. A few months after selling the property and making the donation, I broke ground on a new project. Not a high-end condo. Not another investment opportunity. It was something else entirely. A housing development, mid-sized, thoughtful, sustainable. But more importantly, affordable. Tampa is full of people like me. People who work hard, stay quiet, and get overlooked. People who don't fit into neat categories of success. People who are told they need to look a certain way, live a certain way, own certain things to be considered worthy. This new project? It was for them. I worked with local architects to design spaces that were beautiful without being excessive. 2-bedroom units with natural light, good ventilation, shared green spaces, and rent that wouldn't drown someone trying to start over. We called it Stillwater Grove. A name chosen not for how it sounded,